P.O.P podcast, let's go. The P.O.P podcast, let's go. The P.O.P podcast starts now.
Hello and welcome to the P.O.P podcast. I'm Jason Sirotin, your host, joined by always my co-host Scott Haley. Scott, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good, Jason. Excited to be here with a great guest and be back on recording with you, my friend.
Yeah, it's a really special guest we have today. We have Dr. Olsen. You might know him from his practice in Lander and Riverton, Wyoming. He's got a really interesting story and a precursor. He's going to tell us all what not to do today. He promised that he'd give us that. So we have that to look forward to. Dr. Olsen, let's just start off. How do you and Scott know each other? Because you seem to have a little bit of a history.
Well, I don't remember even when I met Scott, but it had to be after 2006 because that's when I switched my practice over to Damon braces and became kind of a loyalist to Ormco. They've been the company that I've dealt with since then, and so anybody who worked for Ormco, I've rubbed shoulders with a lot over the last, what is that now, almost 20 years.
Dr. Olsen he was also a speaker for us, KE. So there'd be times I would email him and try to convince him to get on a plane to go lecture to a group halfway across the country. He was also very involved in our what used to be the Damon forums, speaking at meetings. And I think the coolest part about Dr. Olsen too is, he was an early adapter in what Ormco was doing at that time with sparkle liners, and so. Insignia, right? And so he, a lot of times he was really instrumental in educating our doctors on new technologies. So, so a different relationship than I had with other doctors because it was almost a working relationship at times, besides being a customer, right? Because very instrumental in helping a lot of people over there in their practices.
Well, yeah, and I think that whole, as you got into the Damon philosophy, those forums were such big, powerful meetings for me. I've been a solo practitioner all my life, and those were that opportunity to come and join like-minded doctors, I would say, especially early on, early 2000s, when Dr. Damon brought that bracket to market and that philosophy was developing. Those meetings were exciting. They were, there was a lot of energy in those meetings, a lot of collaboration that happened at those meetings. It was fun. And, when you're by yourself in an area that was predominantly twin, and that's how I started my practice, was twin and just, traditional straight wire approaches and stuff, to then all of a sudden transition. And for me, that transition happened in less than 2 months.
Really well.
And that was kind of an interesting story, and I tell that sometimes when I speak. But to transition my practice from a twin to a pure self-ligation practice that quickly, and there was so much learning to be done, and those forums were just so valuable. And and now, here we are 20 years later, and there's self-ligation still there. And
not to go down the nerd route here, Jason. So we'll do a little bit of it because I don't get to do it very often. In the world that we're in with P.O.P right now, it's a lot of around the business of orthodontics. But, here we are 20 plus years later, right? In terms of, but you would go to those meetings and it's hard to imagine this, right? You would have doctors stand up and go, "You can't do that." You remember that? You would literally it was like people thought it was, now it's common, right? There's obviously other SL brackets out in the market. There's passive SL, but it was such a paradigm shift in the industry. And it was just you'd have people ooh and ah and it was really an exciting time to be in orthodontics at that time. And then, but now I think, it's just kind of like the kids now with the, it's hard to explain to my kids that I used to dial the phone rotary style at one point. I think most people, a lot of young orthodontists don't understand there was a day where, a practice back then, a busy solo practice, Mark. I mean, you'd be struggling to do 300 cases maybe, right? I mean, it would be hard, right? And a solo doctor now, if they utilize all the technology and utilize self-ligating brackets and digital monitoring and aligners, they're 3 times as much as productive in the
Right.
same footprint. It's crazy.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's changed. I mean, it's amazing what 25 years does. It changes tremendously. What was there, what we started with, and where we've come, amazing.
And that's a terrific transition to really what the show is focused on, which is your career, where you've been, what you've gone through. So can you take us back to the beginning? Where did you start? How did you kind of fall in love with dentistry?
Well, my dad was an orthodontist for one thing, and my exposure to dentistry obviously was early on in my life with him being in that profession. Orthodontics itself happened when I was like a sophomore in high school. I started making holly retainers for my dad. Got to be honest, those first 6 months of making holly retainers was hard for me, and I swore I would never do this ever. And I was into horses and rodeo and stuff like that, and so I was going to be a veterinarian. About 21, came back from church mission and went to work in a cutting horse ranch down in California. Had a great time, and at any rate, it was through that I decided, maybe horse training and stuff wasn't where I should go, and then I just came to the conclusion that, I liked my dad's lifestyle. And I thought, that's where I was comfortable. Dentistry was something I was familiar with. And so at that point, I made the decision to go to dental school. And I'd gone probably 2 years of college. And my dad says, why don't you just go and apply? And I said, well, I don't know how to do that. He goes, well, you got to go talk to a counselor. This is how stupid I was. I mean, it's like I thought when people went and talked to the counselors, I thought they had mental issues going on at school. I mean, I didn't have any idea what a counselor was. I just took the classes I wanted to do. So I went into the pre-dental counselor, and at the time I was at the University of Utah, and I said, hey, I want to apply to dental school. It was like Labor Day, and she says, well, you got to have this application in. You got to take the DAT. And I was like, well, and I had just a week to get all this stuff together. Got it together, applied, and got in. Wow. Well, it all kind of started. I mean, it was just. And then I had to take a bunch of prerequisites all during that year to get qualified to get in there. But ended up going to the University of Iowa. Had a great experience there. When I came into the University of Iowa, I came in they had a research scholarship that they offered about 10 of us from out of state. And we had to do a project during the year. And so it was like the first semester you're supposed to choose a mentor to work with. And so I was interested in orthodontics just from my dad. So I started looking in the orthodontic faculty members, and they had a lot of models there. They could do a lot of retrospective studies. And so we started looking at cephalometrics, and that didn't really excite me too much. And so the semester kind of drug on, and I didn't really get much accomplished. And so the one thing I'd heard was there was this doctor named Dr. Bashara that whatever you do, don't get involved with him because he'll work you
like a dog.
After a semester of not getting much progress done, I decided, what? Maybe I should go and talk to this guy because at least I'll get something done.
Right.
And so I did, and that started me. And they were right. I mean, he had all sorts of research ideas, and so I was with him for the next 3 years, and actually the next 4 years, I stayed an extra year, did an AGD program there, and before I started my graduate school, and actually worked with him in my graduate school a little bit. But by the time I was done, we published close to 20 articles.
Oh, wow. That's really cool.
Amazing the amount that and it wasn't, we did the stuff on the clarity bracket, and we did some bleaching stuff, and bleaching was just coming out. And we did titanium orthos and different types of
Yeah.
things. So it was a bunch of stuff, and they weren't complex projects, but they were just a lot of them. And he just helped me. And that guy was he was a really good mentor. And but anyway, so from there, after my AGD program, I went to Indiana, and I in that AGD program, I had done a lot of implants, and it was back when implants were just, I mean, you're talking about
Right.
no basic implant that was there. And I just knew that was going to be something that was up and coming, I guess. It was
Yeah.
going to be around for a while. And I did a lot of Crown and Bridge. They wanted me to stay and do pros at Iowa, and I really wanted to do ortho. And then when I applied, Indiana had these combination programs, and pros ortho was one of them.
Really? Huh.
So I applied, and the way it worked was you had to apply to both programs, and if you got in, then they would combine the programs. And that particular combination, nobody had ever done. So I was interested, so I did it, and I got in, and
You were the first one to ever do that?
first one to go through Indiana's program, and now there's been probably 3 or 4 since. But it was fun. It was well. It was fun, but it was a lot of work. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't remember my life in Indianapolis very much. A lot of
Well,
lab work.
Jason's from Indianapolis. He'd probably say that's a good thing that you don't
Yeah,
remember.
well, we lived just up the street from the Speedway, and it was
Nice.
pretty amazing.
Did you go to IUPUI?
I did. It was right there on the central campus there.
Yeah. Nice.
And I mean, I started that program. My wife was pregnant with twins, and a month in, I had twins, and that program should have taken 5 years. We did it in 4, and I had my last daughter a month before we left, and I mean, there's a lot of craziness in those IU years. It just, I don't know, guys.
It sounds like you've been overachieving for quite some time.
Well, I mean, it was just one of those things. It was an opportunity. It fit with what I want to do, and it's made me. I'm a different orthodontist because of it. How I see cases are a little bit different. How I approach cases, I just find they're different because of the pros background and that type of thing. And then when I got down there, they wanted me to stay and teach because of all of that education, and it's like I just didn't want to teach, and so things didn't work out to go back to Utah. It wasn't where we wanted to go, so going in and associating with somebody else wasn't on the table because that would just that's like taking a knife to your dad. It's just not going to do it. So I did the most logical thing I could do. I just went out to Montana and started to practice from scratch. I mean, that's what made sense, business sense, right? It's just go start from nothing. I mean, here I got 3 kids, and we go somewhere, and we started from scratch. So I got a little bit fortunate. I had a doctor in Billings. There was an orthodontist that had gotten sick and closed his practice. He basically thought he was going to go to the hospital and just get some treatment and come back, and it ended up being terminal. And he basically put a sign on his door saying, "If you have any problems, talk to this doctor in town." And he shut his door, and he never came back. So I had the space that I got, and just started, and that's how it started. And then about a month into practice, I had another orthodontist from Central Montana call me and say, "Hey, I've got a satellite here. I've been working, and I want to quit. And would you be considered coming up there?" So I did that. So that started my first satellite, and I did that for about 8 years. And then I decided, I didn't like traveling there. So I shut that one down and came back to Billings. And then about a year later, I thought, there's a little town about 10 miles away where most of the parents work in Billings. So that's, you bring a kid to appointment. That means you have to take a half a day off work. Maybe I should just start over there. So I got another little practice going over there, and I did that for about probably about 6 or 7 years. And then I built a building, and everybody it was closer to the freeway, made it easier access. So they came to that. And then about 2012 is when things really changed for me. I'd met a friend here in Wyoming through Damon, and he had a practice down here, and he would fly from practice to practice, but he ended up getting in a plane wreck and it killed him.
Hey, time out real quick here, because this is funny, Jason and Mark. So I live in Minnesota, and I've driven every road in North and South Dakota and Iowa you can imagine, right? This will blow some doctors' minds away, right? But out west or in some of these states, it's not uncommon to have a satellite that's 2 hours away, right, Mark?
Yeah.
And in
Yeah.
some cases, doctors fly into some satellites.
Yeah, pretty common. So he had in this Wyoming location, he had his main office was here at Lander, and then he had 3 satellite locations. One was 35 miles away, and then 2 are about 140 miles away. But at any rate, it was one of the situations where his plane iced up and went down. And
Wow.
so at any rate, I got a call. This was right before Thanksgiving, and I got a call and from his treatment coordinator the next day and said, "Hey, something's happened." And so I came down. Just imagine coming down the Friday after Thanksgiving. And I'm just here to try and give this people hope, really. And pretty raw situation, really unique. I mean, all the way down. It's 4.5 hours to get down here from my house, and I just remember walking in. I had about 8 employees and his widow, and you can imagine lots of tears. It was a pretty raw situation. And I just looked at him and just said, here's the thing. He's not coming back. But I need you to be strong. I need you to realize that you are the connection with these patients. And pretty amazing. Wyoming is kind of a unique state in that they don't allow locum tenens. So, we had a lot of people that were willing to come in, but you couldn't come in. Grateful for Dr. Myers out of South Dakota. He had a practice in Gillette, and he came over, and we had everybody lined up to work one week, and we got through all of the patients and just organizing, figuring out who's active and who, and you're talking about a practice that was all paper. So it was not as easy to go through a database and split all this stuff out. So there was quite a bit of work to do there. And long story short is, about 2 months later, then I ended up buying the practice and taking that practice over. And so for 8 years, I ran a practice in Montana and in Wyoming. So again, this is the business model not to do. Okay. Basically, I'd work every other. Now, this is a good part about it. I mean, it taught me to do stuff I never thought I could do. It taught me to become more efficient, but I had a staff. My staff went from a staff of probably 10 to a staff of 30 over the course of 8 years. So it grew huge. But we would go to so we had 2 main locations, main hubs. And that was kind of nice in one sense because the phones were always answered in the other hub while we were working. So you never had that on the front desk. So that was kind of cool. But we'd work about 3 days in each main hub, and then we'd always go to a satellite location every week. So every week I was somewhere else. And, some places were hard. When I was down in Rollins on I-80, I'd get down about 5 or 6 at night, and there would be a 6-hour drive home. So, that happened for about 8 years. And after 8 years, it's like, okay, my kids are getting grown, and it's like, now I need to figure out more time. And then COVID hit right during that time. And right before COVID, I talked to some DSOs, potentially selling the practice there. And then that we were in some conversations maybe in February, right about the forum time. And then COVID hit and everything kind of went quiet. And then it was during COVID that my wife and I were talking, and it's like, I was thinking about what it would be like to be part of an OSO or whatever. There were parts that I thought would be really cool, the collaboration between doctors and things like that. But then at the end of the day, it's like, this is what I've done. I've built this thing and it's me. And I just, the thought of, I felt like I'd lose my identity, I guess. And so I decided I didn't want to do that. But my wife and I had talked about different ways that we might simplify our life and get time back. And we thought about selling Wyoming before we actually had it on the market for a while, but it just didn't feel right to sell. And right after COVID, that shutdown ended, I had a practice in Billings that had joined an OSO, and they approached me about, would I be willing to sell? It's actually the same OSO that we were talking to, but they came back and said, hey, would you just sell Montana? And it just felt right, so we did. And so that, in a space of about 3 months, which was hard. I mean, as you're starting patients and not knowing if this was going to go through. I mean, it was supposed to be August, and it was September, and it finally happened in October, but it was like, that was a hard 3-month period, as I couldn't tell my staff what was going on.
Yeah.
That's a tough thing. But it ended up working out well for us.
And did you have to work for the OSO for a period of time, or
For
did
about
you?
3 days, I shared. We worked just 3 days together, and I was gone.
Okay,
Wow.
it wasn't a situation where you had to stay, because that would have been a no-go for you. It seems like
Yeah,
because
it
of your
just wouldn't work.
independent
I just
spirit.
don't think it worked for me in that way. But
they
so
had
we ended up
Marc,
moving down here, and we've been down here since. So and
DSO,
then
OSO already had a location in Billings. They just absorbed yours.
yeah, they absorbed it, and they were looking to. They were just an OSO that was looking to grow, and it just made sense to grow there.
Yeah.
So it kind of
And
helped both.
now your private practice is in Lander.
Is in Lander. So I have my
Yeah.
main office here in Lander, and I've got 3 satellites here. And so, Wyoming's a big state, small number of people, so we go where they are.
Yeah, you can learn about Olsen Orthodontics at olsenortho.com. Make sure you go there. You can click and do an in-office or a virtual visit, which is pretty cool. What is going on for you in the future? What are you hoping like the next chapter brings for you, Dr. Olsen?
Well, I think there's been a couple. After I moved here, we switched our practice from 90% Damon to overnight to about 90% aligners. So that was a big transition. It's shifted a little bit. We're now probably 65% aligners, 35% braces. It just shifts and depends on what people want. But that's been a big thing. Dental monitoring has been a big thing. That's really changed how we practiced. And that's been exciting. Those, Scott, you mentioned earlier, I mean, that those technologies provide opportunity to sustain a career and to make it easier to sustain and to do and to continue to practice and do what I like to do. It's changed how the practice feels. It changes the opportunity. It frees up time, which is something I don't think most of us realize. I think as I think about my practice, I don't know how many scheduling templates I've come up with, and it's always, well, something's changed. We got to change the template to make it perfect. And the reality is, what I've come to learn is that every template I've made was perfect. But something happens early in the day or during the early part of the day, somebody who came in for a 2 arch wire adjustment has a bracket off or something, and then it all of a sudden throws that all out of whack, and you spend the rest of the morning recovering. And then we have our lunch hour to totally catch up, and then we do it again in the afternoon. And that's where I think monitoring has been such a powerful thing, because you see what's happening 98% of the time before it ever comes in. If you got a loose bracket, what's going on. And so it makes that much easier to manage. An aligner focused practice is different than a brace focused practice. The amount of staff that you need to man that is different. But I will tell you that with the technologies, there is an expense with that. And you have to be able to offset that. And the offset is your staffing. Your staffing has to decrease in order to keep the profitability there.
Jason, do you mind if we just focus here? Because this is the conversation that happens right? Like there's a lot of doctors that the majority of doctors haven't done what you've done. Let's be honest, right? Like you were a traditional fixed practice that transitioned over to super heavy aligner usage, 90%. Now you're 60, which 60% would be almost double than the national average, right? I think the national average is probably about 30% aligners. So this is the conversation that everyone has, right? With self-ligating, with aligners, like it's like they can't get, or dental monitoring, like doctors mentally can't get over the hurdle of the cost of using those products. You obviously did, but you said something really important, which is this only works if you're actually utilizing the technology to decrease the number of appointments and eliminate overhead with your staff. Is that right? And
right.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
You have to be able to leverage the technology. You're paying for it. So, and what I see, a couple of things that I've seen as I've talked to different groups around the country and stuff is, I think people get excited about technology, But when it comes to implementing, we start to implement, and then we find that we run into some struggles, and then we stop. And, I guess this happened. Maybe part of the reason why I did this is because of how I got into the Damon system. Okay. I mean, when I saw Dr. Damon the first time, this was back in Tempe, way back in February of 2006, he gave a lecture. I was intrigued by it. It made sense to me. I was excited to do it. But he made a statement. He says, if you're going to do this, treat your next 50 cases, every one of them, one after another, with the Damon bracket system, and just do it. He says, if you pick and try and cherry pick what you do, you may get and it may work, but he says you won't see it. He says just do it, and then you will see the benefits of it, because you will, and that's the thing. I think that's true with these technologies is when you go in, go all in, be committed to it. Some things really change. I mean, look, going from twin brackets to Damon, there's a huge mental shift that happens there. As you look at these crowded cases, you're like, before it was always extractions, you got to create space, whatever. And all of a sudden you're able to do these things, non-extraction, by driving that transverse. Well, there's a technique to there. You got to learn that. And you got, you trust the system that you're being taught and follow it. Then it turns out, what I have learned, another thing that's really big here is really good orthodontists have really good systems, and they are disciplined to stay true to those systems. And so, if you want your cases to look like Dwight Damon's cases, then you need to think and do what Dwight Damon would do, and they will come out. But if you try and hijack that and throw twin mechanics onto that, then it becomes very difficult. But with monitoring, I remember when I switched to that, what happens? You break your systems. Initially, you put it in place, you are going to break your systems. There's going to be a problem in your schedule, and you have to figure that out. And everybody's going to have a little different experience depending on how your systems are, but be prepared for that. And that doesn't mean the product's wrong. It just means that you have to change and adapt to that. And then you have that to leverage for you. So let me give you an example with monitoring. So there was a point where I moved all my patients onto monitoring. Okay. There was some really good parts to that. But the hard part is that when you have, a lot of people will say, and we were talking about this earlier, that, well, you're a rural practice, monitoring makes sense. Well, for aligners, yeah, it makes really good sense. I mean, aligners, it takes you from, I'm in down to like maybe 6 appointments at most. I mean, I treated a kid out of Montana that came down to see me. I mean, we saw him 6 times in 2 years, and big open mind. It was a great case, but that's what monitoring allowed to do with aligners. With brackets, monitoring is awesome as well, but you can set it up to where you can actually track the passivity of the wires. Well, that would be the way to really leverage that product, so that we pay a lot of money for the copper night ties and the Damon brackets, and so you can maximize that out by letting that wire continue to work until it runs out of gas, and then bring them in. But when you have satellite locations and you're there every 6 weeks and you're limited on that, I can't leverage it that way. So that didn't make sense for me. And that's where you have to look at your case. Does this technology give you the return that you need? It didn't there. So I took my brace patients off because it didn't make me more efficient.
Man.
So all I'm doing there is adding cost. So I think that's one of the things you got to look at. I think the same thing with aligners. I mean, if you're going to do aligners, I mean, you got to do enough of them to make it worth it, to understand. I mean, if you're only doing a handful of aligners, then you're only in that software every so often. It's hard. It's hard to be efficient. Yeah. So so I think all those things, those are things that just teach me. And those technologies, people do like the technologies, but it's not. Let me give you one more story. When I first got out of school, I knew that all dentists liked to golf, so I thought I should probably learn to golf better. So beautiful. And I had a gal that worked for me. Her dad was a country club pro. My first assistant, her dad was country club pro. So she got me these lessons, went out to Olsen Country Club and started to learn how to hit golf balls. And I was, it's like, this is great. If I just practice, I could be Tiger Woods, So they ordered me a custom set of golf clubs, right? All set to me, and they're great. And you know what? Now today, I hit some of the best slices I've ever hit with beautifully custom golf clubs. And so what do you learn? I mean, it's not that the golf clubs are great; they're great, but it's the technology we have is great. But learning to use the technology is more critical.
Yeah.
Oh, you can have all the best technology in the world, but if you don't use it and you don't know how to use it and you don't continue to be disciplined to focus on how to leverage it more,
Yeah.
you're
That
missing.
that that is a great pearl because I can't, over my time in this industry, it's like if you're going to do something, do it, right? You're going to waste more time, money, and effort if you're going to dabble or if you're going to, you know, monkey around with like either do it or don't do it. And that's a huge pearl because I would say most of the doctors that jump into things like that, they they fail. Most of them actually fail. They don't do it, and they don't stick with it. And I can't tell you with aligners or monitoring or Damon system. There's been so many doctors that told me that I was about to give up, and then all of a sudden something clicked, right? And then those are your biggest doctors that are like advocates or true believers, right? So if you do it, do it. And great lesson on the efficiencies, and you better get your ROI somewhere else or get rid of it.
Well, I mean, you don't want to just add overhead. I mean, stuff is expensive as it is, and obviously that's where P.O.P comes in, and there's some great things about P.O.P because it helps us as private practitioners be able to compete and work on a more equal ground, which is great. I mean, to me, we're going to move to P.O.P here just a little bit, just to give a plug here. I mean, for me, the ability to, I mean, yes, there's a buying power here, and that's awesome. But I was with Brian Horsley about 3 weeks ago, and it's like it was so nice to just sit down and talk and just.
Right.
I mean, we now are creating a network of doctors to collaborate with, and I love that aspect of it. Um,
I'm so glad you say that. I this morning literally have talked to two doctors interested in the group, and hopefully people watching this, it's people like Brian Horsley, what you just mentioned, and Dr. Olson here. I always tell the doctors like, hey, look, savings is awesome, right? Like I know that's why you're calling me, but like 2 to 3 years from now, that's going to be the second or third reason you're in this group. Sitting with you at a meeting or having coffee with you or at down the road, or if we're in breakout study groups, it's this mastermind group that's the power of this group, because what you guys can get from each other is going to save you so much more money and time than an agreement on a box of gloves.
yeah, it is.
The,
I mean, it just, and the longer you practice, the more you appreciate the relationships. I mean, that's the stuff that's special. I mean,
yeah,
and we really are just in a people business. I
yeah,
mean, we happen to do braces, but those people business is not just our patients, it's our teams, it's our professional relationships we have. I mean, those are some of the choicest things that we have, and that's what makes the experience so good. I mean, um, I thought, back when I switched to Damon braces, I should tell you this real quick. There was this Dr. Tagawa that came in to speak on self-ligation to our Montana State meeting, and he was good friends with our president. And there was another orthodontist out of San Francisco that had come in and went out of Atlanta. And these guys had gone skiing the day before. And they had come down and they were having lunch. So just, they're all in their 60s. Been doing this for 30 some odd years, right? And so they're having lunch. This is what really caught me, that changed it. If I had to have one story that changed my career, this was it. I mean, I'd come to this meeting, it was just your annual state meeting, and I'm going to listen to this guy. And he's telling the story about how they're skiing, and then they came in for lunch. And I thought to myself, what are 60-year-old guys going to talk about at lunch? These are all friends. And I thought, maybe there's a bucket list of ideas, or maybe there's, talking about family, hobbies, whatever, something like that. They're talking about orthodontics, and they're just talking about how excited they are to go to work. And here I am, like 6 years in. And it's like, I'm not excited. And I listened to the talk, and the talk was fine. I mean, it was just talk, but I couldn't sleep that night. it wasn't because of the self-ligation talk that he'd given, but it was because these guys had something I didn't have. They had this relationship and this excitement about what they did, and so for me, it's like that's what I sought out to do. And and how have I gotten there? Yeah, I've gotten there through self-ligation, and the Damon system that changed my whole practice, changed how fun it was to do stuff. It simplified things. Monitoring has done the same thing. There's been all these things I've talked about. They were just inflections in my story that reinvigorated and gave me challenges to get through. And here I am, 57 years old, and what do I get excited about? It's like now, I just came back from the insiders meeting in Ormco. These are guys that are it's another group of people that are just important people to me.
Yeah.
And the thing is that these guys, a lot of these guys they're so giving. They share. And they're not afraid to talk about their failures, and that's a big thing too. We all fail. And the faster we can fail, the quicker we get to success. And each one of these technologies, that's the idea. Implement them and fail. Fail as quick as you can so that you can get through and get it established to what works. But that's the thing I really enjoy. I enjoy, that's part of why I speak. I like going out and just helping people. It's not my stuff's any better than anybody else's stuff, but I can show you stuff not to do. And I can successfully, but that's the stuff that's empowering. It's like we all have stuff that we struggle with, and it's okay. It's like if we can learn how to fix that and avoid that mistake. And that's the thing that I missed from my story. Starting out solo practitioner from scratch. I had to create all of those systems to run an office, and there's a lot of $100,000 mistakes that I made that as you try and figure this out. And I wish, you asked me earlier, if you could go back in time, what would it be? I wish I could have had those types of relationships earlier.
Early.
Yeah. Early. Yeah. Because they would have, it was later when I came in across the Tom Pitts and the Dwight Damons and the different, people that were willing to share. And sometimes, I remember going to the Utah State meeting and it was like, wow, nobody wanted to talk to anybody. It was all too competitive. And I wish we'd get that out of our market. There's plenty to go. I heard Dr. Carell speak a couple weeks ago, and he's right. There is more than enough abundance, but as we can learn to share with one another, we'll all prosper.
Yeah. An abundance mindset.
Yeah.
And that's the cool thing about this group. It's a cool thing about the doctors that are in it. I appreciate how authentic you've been with us today and how passionate you are about our industry, Marc. So thank you so much for that.
You're welcome.
Yeah, absolutely. We want to thank you for being on the show. We want to remind people if they want to learn more or contact you to go to olsenortho.com. Also want to remind people to go check out P.O.P. Like you heard Dr. Olsen talking about, it's an incredible organization that allows you the autonomy and the freedom, yet the collective spirit and education that you can learn from these pearls like Dr. Olsen gave today. So go to pop-ortho.com, go right out to the top, schedule an intake call. And Scott, what'll happen when they click that button?
I think it takes you to my Calendly, and then I'll see your name on there, and I'm going to give you a call. And we spend about 20, 30 minutes together. I learn about your practice. I share, the cool things we're doing at P.O.P. And I'm very honest with everybody. Like sometimes some doctors are a good fit. Some doctors aren't a good fit. And we're just trying to put pieces together when it makes sense. And but I'd love to take the time. I love talking to you guys. I love learning about you and your practices. So schedule a call. Let's chat. And I can share the good stuff we're doing here, and I can learn about you and your practice.
And if you're in need of digital marketing help and want a free evaluation, you can email Caroline at brainbitescreative.com, and you can visit BrainBites website at brainbitescreative.com. On behalf of the P.O.P. podcast, I'm Jason Sirotin, and we will see you next time.
P.O.P. podcast, let's go. The P.O.P. podcast, let's go.